Founders miss out on really branding themselves, not their companies, correctly, and talking about their story, because in an increasingly social media hungry India, we people want to know the stories behind the brand. They want to know, hey, there is a Rukam, but Rukam is just is not a real person. Right?
Yeah.
Who's the person running Rukam? That's who we want to know, and that's whose story we resonate with. Do we resonate with that person? And it's happening more and more. You're seeing more and more Bollywood stars, getting behind brands, and people want to know who they are beyond of whatever persona that they put out. But you've had a very, very interesting start. You started out at Times of India, and then you were a senior assistant editor at Business Standard, and then you also did the director and CEO of eSpace Corporate Initiatives. This whole journey of your life, I think a lot of it, obviously, because you have an MA in English lit, right?
Yeah. So I think, if I were to sort of define myself with one word, I think the word is contrarian.
Okay.
And I think maybe that's what's useful to be an early stage investor, is to have a slightly contrarian sort of way
Very true.
to think. And also, it's about how India was and is now as a country. So if you look at developed economies like the US, I think there is a better understanding that life or your education and what you eventually do at different parts of your career are not one sort of linear sort of extension, one sort of thing leading to another in this very, very sort of picture perfect sort of thing. And if you see how the US education system is also organized, what you study, and then when what your final major is, and then what you finally end up sort of working, can be pretty diverse, right? I think in India we like our silos, and we like that if it's an engineer, then an engineer will build X sort of engineering product, whereas to my mind pretty much everything that you do, and it doesn't matter what you study, is based on logic. So, I mean, I don't think most people understand that language and how you communicate is as much about logic as, let's say, engineering is, for example.
Right.
You look at numbers are based on logic again. So, to imagine that you need a degree in finance to understand finance, to my mind, is a huge, sort of mythology that we have sort of, built ourselves and said that, okay, you went to an engineering college, so let me just now, for the rest of my life, I can only be an engineer, for example, right? So, and if you look at investing in the US, and the VC industry, of course, started in the US. So one of the most successful investors in the world is Michael Ritz, and he was a journalist.
Yeah.
His bulk of his career was as a writer and a journalist, and then he transitioned to Sequoia, and went on to become one of the most successful partners for Sequoia. And the companies that he sort of sourced and invested were all tech companies. So the point being that investment, to my mind, is based on logic. And because you're like when you're trying to look at something that doesn't exist, right? So when Google was invested, there was search engines, but what it could be didn't exist, right? So it's about being able to extrapolate from a imperfect data set.
Correct.
Right? And I think if you allow a mix of facts and imagination to sort of coalesce in a good sort of a way, then you end up investing in Google, right?
Yeah,
or
very nice.
Apple, or any of these companies which did not follow a perfect path.
And in fact, I think it's also important to note that no startup starts out the way they wanted to start out. They always end up into a product that becomes successful. You talk of any company, Netflix, didn't really start out as Netflix, right? We talk about, let's say, Flipkart, right? What Flipkart is today versus what it started out, or why Amazon is so successful. Bulk of its revenues does not come from the original business that it started out with, right? So flexibility to pivot needs to be there, and I think you're absolutely right. I think some of the best stock investors that I know were actually engineers. I don't know whether they understand the graphs better than anybody else.
No, look at Jim Simmons, right? He was a math professor, created the quant way of investing, and changed how you invest,
That's
right?
it.
So that's my point. See, what happens is that, in fact, it's a very interesting story. So I was talking to a potential LP yesterday, And so, I mean, the question he, of course, asked me was, what's your background? So I was telling him, and we were talking about, and I said, when I started Rukum, and I said to myself, I will not have a single write-off. He said, that's because you don't come from the finance industry, and that's why you could think like that. Because if you had come from the finance sort of background, you would have gone with a standard sort of, that I just need one outlier and that's it, So I think it's very, very important to be able to look at a problem with a fresh set of eyes. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it happens when you're an outsider. When you're an insider, you know all the reasons not to do something. And also you end up doing more of the same, right? And the world doesn't need more of the same of anything.
Correct.
You always need a fresh way to... And then the other question that I get asked a lot is, oh, but, writing, and oh, but investing. And I'm like, early stage investing, my friend, is not about Excel sheets. It's really about trying to understand what can be, which is how a writer thinks, right? You learn to ask questions. And to be able to ask questions, you do your own research, right? And you've got to get to an
I love that concept of yours, that you have to be that it's about being a writer and being able to almost crystal gaze of what could be. And then that really gives you not a right, but maybe an advantage of dreaming what the founder wants to dream. Is that what you were trying to get at?
Also, it allows you to sort of have a little bit of a bullshit filter. You see, when you're a writer, you're also a little cynical because you feel it's all done, right? So you tend to push a little bit more to try and get a little bit more deeper, not into the TAM.
Right.
Because, God knows what's the TAM, right? The TAM can shrink and the TAM can, get created. And we've seen so many examples of that. But you want to make sure that the founder's story is sort of making sense. Because ultimately, as a writer, you write stories. I mean, non-fiction, but they're still stories, right? So when you
it's
write...
almost like a caption in my head right now. Let's not get into the TAM, let's get into the man.
Exactly. You're a man with words. So you try and get much more into... So, over the years, I have a far more crystallized answer when people ask me that, what do you look for, when you're looking? And my answer is crystal clear now. It's the founder. I mean, again, I get into trouble sometimes when I say I almost don't care about TAM, and then people say, what do you mean? You must care about TAM. And so what I'm trying to say is that if I was to look at it logically, I mean, if the founder doesn't have ability, you could be in a very large TAM. And, there are so many examples of that. I mean, every day those examples are around us, right? And... great founders create their own TAM. So, which is why we all look up to a Steve Jobs or a Elon Musk or somebody like a Dipinder. But what was the TAM for Zomato? Zero. Kuch nahi tha. Right? And what was the TAM for Blinkit? Kuch nahi tha. I mean, Zepto, kya tha? There was no TAM. So, I think the ability to be able to see the dream that the founder is dreaming. At the same time, you're a little cynical, so you don't completely buy into it, because that's the danger. That's where you could really, really fail. So, and that has got translated in how we look at deals. So we are very happy to do deals which others are not doing, in sectors that others are not doing.
Very interesting.
And we lead, even if there's nobody else to lead with us. Because I feel, and those are the deals that have done well for us, To some extent, I feel we've not given in to any FOMO yet. Hopefully, we'll be able to keep that DNA. It's always hard. But if you have a little bit of cynicism along with imagination and the ability to ask, the right questions, because you've done the work.
Right.
I mean, you still have to do the work, right? You have to study, you have to try and understand what is, getting built here. And to my mind, as a VC, you cannot be an expert, because how do you become an expert in the future? Because we are all betting on the future. So how do you become an expert in that, right? You can't become an expert in what could become our future, right? But what you need to know is to be able to spot that trend early enough and take a little bit of a calculated call that this will become mainstream versus something else that's going to fizzle away.
True.
And that's pretty much how a writer goes about it.